The Argent Ordnance rocket launcher damage buff mod is back in Destiny 2 with the launch of Season of the Wish, but as all the old Charged with Light mods got vaulted with Lightfall, this time around it's on the seasonal artifact, and it's better than ever. I just finished a whole day of testing every rocket archetype and perk to find out exactly how it works, so here's why it's going to be so strong this season, and the best way you can incorporate it into your builds. It does require some setup and good timing to get the most out of it depending on which rocket and perks you're running, but trust me, it's worth it. First you need to have armor charge, which will require running surge or kickstart mods on your armor to be able to store it. Just having the Argent Ordnance mod activated on the artifact won't be enough on its own for the game to let you build up charges, and I recommend storing as many charges as possible. I think this season will be the first that I run triple charged up mods on my chest piece to be able to hold up to 6 armor charge stacks for damage phases. When you fire a rocket, the mod will consume 1 stack of your armor charge and immediately provide a 15% damage buff to that same rocket, and it stacks on top of everything else. Weapon perks, Radiant, Weaken, Surge mods, Wolfpack rounds, and even other artifact mods like Torch, which gives an extra 5% to weapon damage while Radiant against stasis or strand affected enemies. So it means we have the potential to do significantly more weapon damage now than we ever have before. Now you might be thinking, well, we can only hold 6 armor charges, but most rockets hold at least 7, and much more with reserve mods. Won't we run out of armor charge early and also lose our surge mod buffs? Well, no. The description on the mod reads that it grants increased damage and reload speed until you reload or stow your rocket launcher. But the good news is that description isn't true. After firing a rocket, the Godslayer Warheads buff appears on screen and stays there for 4.5 seconds, during which time you can reload and fire more rockets and still benefit from that first buff window without costing additional armor charges. So if you can fire lots of rockets quickly, as we can with mag size perks or reload effects, you can benefit from Argent Ordnance and Surge leg mods on every rocket fired during damage phase. It's worth noting though that you do lose the Godslayer buff if you stow the rocket launcher. That part of the description is correct. As for the reload speed increase, while the Godslayer buff is active, all legendary rocket launchers, regardless of archetype, gain a time between shots of about 2.75 seconds. There are small differences of a few frames here and there, but they're pretty much the same. Meaning the slowest reloading rockets, such as precision frames and those with bipod, which normally sit closer to 4 seconds, see a massive increase. Adaptive and aggressives, which are closer to 3 seconds already, see a smaller improvement. And that's without loader mods or other reload effects, just the Godslayer buff. If you add loader mods or effects on top like alloy casing, lunafaction boots, or solar hunters on your mark, you easily hit the cap of just over 2 seconds. But as I'll demonstrate shortly, hitting the reload cap on some rockets is actually much worse for the buff timer refreshes. So in most circumstances on legendary rocket launchers, you shouldn't run additional loader effects for your rocket at all and just rely on the Godslayer buff. And in a similar way to how you need to consider the timing window of single-shot rockets, all of the following rocket perks will further affect that relationship to each Godslayer Warhead's activation window. First up, Clown Cartridge or Enhanced Reconstruction that give 2 shots in every mag work very well with Argent Ordnance, and I'd go as far as to say their relationship to the 4.5 seconds Godslayer timing window is perfect. So if you don't want to have to think about timing windows or potentially adjusting your firing or reload rotations, just use one of these. Even at long ranges or low velocities, you quickly hit both rockets within one window and still have leftover buff to boost the next reload, which runs out just before the next mag is ready. So the next rocket fired consumes another armor charge stack and activates a new buff window exactly as the first mag did. Rinse and repeat. However, with these perks it is possible to reload too fast and interfere with this perfect rotation, causing some glitchy interactions. In this clip, my Clown Cartridge Hothead has alloy casing for plus 30 to reload on top of the Godslayer buff, so it reloads and fires the first shot of a new mag before the previous buff window has ended. And although that first rocket hits and receives the buff from the previous window, because it didn't refresh the buff, the second rocket doesn't have increased damage, and the next reload is slower due to not having Godslayers up. And if you look closely, you can see that despite that first rocket on the new mag firing just within the previous window, and not refreshing the buff, it actually still consumed a new armor charge stack as if it did. So this is the main thing you want to pay attention to when using Argent Ordnance. Reload and firing times that occur right at the end of a window, because if this happens, now you have the worst case scenario for everything. No damage buff, no reload buff, yet still losing the armor charge. And this same issue is why I didn't include bipod in the previous section despite it also giving 2 shots on every mag, because bipod also increases rate of fire, leading to the same problem where later rockets are fired right at the end of earlier buff windows. So alternating mags do not refresh the damage buff and they reload slower, but they still consume armor charge. So I would avoid running bipod on its own with Argent Ordnance unless you're willing to deliberately fire them slower than is actually possible, which seems counterproductive. Bipod and Reconstruction together, however, behave slightly better but can still be awkward. The first mag of 4 rockets times perfectly. They all receive the damage buff, and the first reload is also buffed by Godslayers, which runs out just in time to be refreshed by the first rocket of the new mag. But as Reconstruction takes time to proc, that reload will be too fast and you'll fire only the 2 rockets you gain from bipod before Reconstruction even adds a single extra rocket, leading to an automatic reload too early. Enhanced Reconstruction can help here to fill the mag faster. If set up correctly, the first mag will fire 4, and all subsequent mags will fire 3 without needing to manually adjust your timings at all. Envious Assassin behaves similarly, as you can proc it twice, so the first mag holds 4 rockets, but Cold Comfort specifically has the Restoration Ritual origin trait, which preps a free reload when the mag is empty, in which case the first mag can shoot 5. To proc Envious twice, first defeat a few enemies and then swap to the rocket to see that it has 2 in the mag. It's important you do this to be able to re-proc it. Then defeat a bunch more enemies and make sure to finish one of them to activate the origin trait. Now when you swap to the rocket, you should see 4 in the mag. The 5th won't be added until it's empty. The difference between Envious's first mag and the bipod Reconstruction shown previously is that bipod increases rate of fire, so Envious will fire its shots slower. Therefore, although you can get the Godslayer damage buff on the entire first mag with Envious Assassin, often the glitch will occur on shots at the end of the buff window where the final rocket will consume an extra stack of armor charge without refreshing the buff, so then your first reload will be slow and you've spent extra armor charge for no reason. Therefore, when running Envious, it's a good idea to pause briefly before firing the final shot, so the buff refreshes ready for the reload. After that, you can treat it like any other single-shot rocket launcher without really thinking about it. I'm also going to throw an honorary mention here to the new World Drop Aggressive Frame rocket launcher, Crux Termination 4. It has Clown Cartridge, Envious Assassin and Reconstruction in the first column, and Bipod in the second column, so there's a huge range of magazine sizes and firing rates available with this rocket. Obviously, I haven't had a chance to get it yet to include actual tests in this video, but you can probably apply the same theories to it when it comes to Argent Ordnance. And it also has Slide Shot in the first column, which will be very interesting to see how that works on a rocket. It could potentially be the best DPS perk on a rocket we've ever had. I also want to mention damage perks, as this video has mainly been about how to optimize the timing windows of this artifact mod. Honestly, the best rocket launchers to use for damage phases with Argent Ordnance are still going to be the same ones as we've been using without. Apex Predator or Cold Comfort with either Reconstruction or Envious Assassin, plus Bait and Switch, which gives a 35% damage buff. As all rockets can benefit from the additional 15% damage, Argent Ordnance doesn't really help any lower performing rocket launchers catch up, except maybe to counteract Bipod's very slow base reload speed. But are we really going to be using Bipod to fire more lower damage rockets when we could just fire less high damage rockets and then swap to a special weapon and deal much more damage overall? No, we're not. And finally, before moving on to talk about how exotic rocket launchers interact with Argent Ordnance, I want to mention Lasting Impression, as a huge part of optimizing the artifact mod comes down to buff timing windows. Lasting Impression, which deals an additional 25% explosive damage after a 3-second delay, obviously introduces some problems. As you might expect, although instant detonation single-shot rocket launchers can get 2 damage buff rockets from a single Godslayer's window, the 3-second delay on Lasting Impression single-shot launchers means the second rocket explodes after the buff has disappeared, and even on multiple shot launchers this is still a problem. Here I'm using overflow with lasting impression, and the second detonation is still not buffed even though they were fired close together. However, there is an exception to this that is quite interesting. If you're close to the boss, by cutting down on the travel time of the rocket, you can benefit from the Godslayer buff on both rockets, from either double shot or even some single shot launchers. Here I have a red herring with alloy casing and enhanced field prep, and I'm crouched down close to the boss to proc field prep. Because my reload is so fast, I can attach the second rocket to the boss before the first has even detonated, and that first detonation actually triggers the second, so they effectively both explode at the same time within the window for the Godslayer's buff. Again, you're probably just going to use bait and switch, but this does definitely make lasting impression more viable. All exotic rocket launchers by default reload and fire slower than legendaries. They fire slow enough to consume an armor charge stack on every reload, so you would run out of armor charge very quickly, also losing any surge leg mod buff as well. So whereas with legendaries I recommend not running additional loader mods or other reload effects, for almost all these exotics I definitely would. Galahorn, however, behaves similarly to legendary double shot rockets, timing nicely with the Godslayer windows, although as you'll notice with double solar loader mods and on your mark active, the reload was sometimes too fast and it consumed a stack without refreshing the buff, so either pace your shots or use less reload buffs on top of Godslayers here. Two-tailed fox with loader mods and on your mark active, reloads and fires quick enough to benefit from the damage buff on 2 mags from 1 buff stack. But once on your mark wore off, it was back to 1 stack per reload, so you'll want a longer lasting reload increase here, such as Lunafactions in a Well of Radiance. It's also worth noting that after a second solar rocket hits and applies more Scorch, the ignition that occurs is too late to benefit from the Godslayer buff. However, if you use a Hunter Dodge reload to fire faster, that ignition is within the buff window and does gain an additional 15% from the mod. Please ignore how badly Deathbringer tracks in this encounter due to the scenery above Cali. We're just looking at the timing window interactions with Argent Ordnance here, which are quite inconsistent due to how spread out the projectile hits are, sometimes coming in after the buff has ended. It could potentially work on a large boss with a lot of space above them, so you could deliberately give it more time to fall and therefore gain the damage buff from the second activation just before it hits, but then you wouldn't have any buff when the last mag hit, so in short, don't bother. Dragon's Breath is really interesting. It passively generates fuel up to ×5, at which point if the mag was previously left empty, it auto-reloads from reserves, but you can also reload it manually if you want to. When fired, it emits fuel over time that causes scorch and ignitions, and as ignitions trigger, it refills fuel faster to improve the effectiveness of the next shot. You can fire rockets that are not at the maximum ×5 fuel, they'll just be less effective. The problem with Dragon's Breath when it comes to Argent Ordnance is that for boss damage, it shines in a multiple weapon rotation, much like how you would use something like Anarchy. Stick it, swap and do damage with something else, wait for the fuel to reach ×5 and autoload, then swap back and stick again. But stowing a rocket launcher clears the Godslayer warhead buff, so you would instead need to fire and reload rockets one after another, which would lead to firing rockets with less fuel and less effectiveness. Also, its damage over time model means it will still be damaging in between buff applications, so not benefiting from the full effect of Argent Ordnance anyway. It also shines as an add clear monster, as it can also benefit from the Blast Radius artifact mod to gain armor charge from rocket launcher final blows, which can then be spent the next time you fire it for increased damage and reload speed. Just remember the bonus damage will go away when stowed. Not much to say about Wardcliff Coil other than it needs a lot of loader effects to be able to benefit from a single activation of the Godslayer damage buff across multiple mags. Otherwise, it's 1 stack of armor charge per mag due to a very slow reload. And because Eyes of Tomorrow takes so long to fire, every mag consumes 1 stack of armor charge, even with loader mods and on your mark active. So definitely one to use for add clear with Blast Radius instead of single target damage with Argent Ordnance. Thanks for watching. If you think I've missed anything, let me know in the comments, and if you wanted to like and subscribe while you're here, that would be great.